The gold wedding band slipped from Natalie Owens's trembling fingers into the pawnbroker's weathered palm, and she wondered if her dead husband would forgive her for what she was about to do. The year was 1883, and Placitas, New Mexico, was nothing more than a scattered collection of adobe buildings huddled against the Sandia Mountains, where dust devils danced through the streets, and the summer sun beat down mercilessly on anyone foolish enough to stand still for too long. Natalie had been a widow for 8 months now, ever since Thomas had been thrown from a spooked horse and broken his neck. She wore her grief like a second skin, but today she had no time for mourning. Today, a stranger's life hung in the balance, and somehow that mattered more than the weight of her own sorrow. "This is solid gold," the pawnbroker said, holding the ring up to the light filtering through his grimy window. His name was Silas, and he had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from old leather. "Worth a fair bit. What are you needing money for so badly, Mrs. Owens?" Natalie's throat tightened. She was 23 years old, and the ring had been on her finger for only 2 years before Thomas died. It was the last tangible piece of their brief marriage, the last thing that proved she had been loved, however briefly. But this morning, when she had found the young woman collapsed outside the general store, burning with fever and muttering in delirium, something inside her had shifted. The woman was perhaps 18 or 19, with dark hair plastered to her forehead and skin so hot it seemed to glow. No one else had stopped to help. Everyone in town was too busy with their own survival to care about a stranger. "There's a woman who needs a doctor," Natalie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "She's very sick. I've been caring for her in my home, but she needs medicine." "Real medicine from Santa Fe. The doctor says it will cost $30. Silas whistled low. "That's a lot of money for someone you do not even know." "I know she will die without it," Natalie said simply. "How much will you give me for the ring?" He turned it over in his fingers, examining the simple band Thomas had saved for months to buy. $40. That is more than fair." Natalie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as Silas counted out the bills, each one feeling like another piece of her past being peeled away. But when she thought of the young woman lying in her bed, gasping for breath, she knew there was no other choice. Some things mattered more than gold, more than memories. Sometimes you had to let go of what you loved to save a life, even if that life belonged to a complete stranger. She took the money and walked out into the blazing afternoon sun, not looking back at the pawn shop or the ring that now sat in Silas's case. The doctor, a tired man named Benson who had settled in Placitas after the war, had already left for Santa Fe to get the medicine himself. He had been skeptical when Natalie had promised him the money, but her determination had convinced him. Now she had to trust that he would return in time. The walk back to her small adobe house at the edge of town seemed longer than usual. The heat shimmered off the packed earth, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the lowing of cattle being driven toward the railroad depot. Placitas was changing, slowly but surely. The railroad had brought new opportunities, new faces, new problems. The young woman Natalie had found was one of those new faces, though she had yet to wake long enough to explain what had brought her to this dusty corner of New Mexico. Inside her home, Natalie found the woman exactly as she had left her, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, her breathing shallow and rapid. Natalie had been bathing her forehead with cool water, trying to bring down the fever, but nothing seemed to help. Whatever illness had taken hold was vicious and unrelenting. "Hold on," Natalie whispered, wringing out a fresh cloth. "Just hold on a little longer. Help is coming." The woman's eyelids fluttered, and for a moment Natalie thought she might wake. But then she fell still again, lost in whatever fevered dreams consumed her. Natalie settled into the chair beside the bed, the same chair where she had sat vigil over Thomas in the days before he died. It seemed her life had become an endless series of waiting rooms, of holding hands that might slip away at any moment. She must have dozed off despite herself, because when she jolted awake, the light had changed. Late afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. For a confused moment, she could not remember where she was or why her neck ached so badly. Then she saw the woman in the bed and remembered everything. A knock at the door made her jump. She rose quickly, her heart hammering, and opened it to find not Dr. Benson, but a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of long days outdoors. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage after rain. He looked to be in his late 20s, and there was something about the way he held himself that suggested both confidence and wariness in equal measure. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "my name is Zachary Vance. I am looking for Dr. Benson. They told me in town he might be here." Natalie shook her head. "He left for Santa Fe this morning to get medicine. He will not be back until tomorrow at the earliest. Are you hurt?" Zachary's eyes flicked past her to the dim interior of the house. "No, madam, I am looking for someone, a young woman. She would have come through here in the last few days. Dark hair, about 18 years old. Her name is Caroline." Natalie's breath caught. "You know her, the woman I found." His expression shifted from polite inquiry to sharp focus. "She is here. Is she all right?" "She is very sick," Natalie said, stepping back to let him in. "I found her collapsed in the street yesterday morning. No one knew who she was or where she came from." Dr. Benson said it looks like a severe infection, possibly from a wound. He went to Santa Fe to get proper medicine because we do not have what she needs here. Zachary moved past her with the unconscious grace of someone used to covering ground quickly. When he reached the bed, his face went pale beneath his tan. "Caroline," he breathed, and there was such raw fear in his voice that Natalie felt her own chest tighten in response. "Who is she to you?" Natalie asked quietly. "My sister," Zachary said, not taking his eyes off the young woman. "My baby sister. She ran away from home 3 weeks ago. She was angry at our father, wanted to make her own way in the world. I have been tracking her ever since, trying to bring her home." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "She is all the family I have left." Natalie watched as he gently touched Caroline's forehead, his jaw tightening at the heat he found there. There was something about the tenderness in his gesture that made her think of Thomas, of all the small kindnesses that had marked their brief marriage. She turned away, blinking against unexpected tears. "The doctor will be back tomorrow," she said again, more to convince herself than him. "The medicine will help. She just has to hold on until then." Zachary straightened, and when he looked at her, there was a depth of gratitude in his eyes that made her uncomfortable. "You have been caring for her, a complete stranger." "What else was I supposed to do?" Natalie said, crossing her arms. "Let her die in the street?" "Most people would have," he said simply. "Or they would have done the bare minimum and let fate decide. You went beyond that. The pawnbroker in town told me what you did. He said you sold your wedding ring to pay for medicine." Natalie felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or anger she could not say. "Silas talks too much. He said you are a widow, that the ring was all you had left of your husband." "I have my memories," Natalie said sharply. "That is more than your sister will have if she does not get help. The ring is just metal. It does not bring him back." Zachary studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her defensive words to the grief that still lived beneath them. but he did not push. Instead, he said, "I need to repay you. When my sister is well, I will buy back your ring and return it to you." "That is not necessary," Natalie began, but he cut her off. "It is necessary," he said firmly. "You saved my sister's life. The least I can do is restore what you lost in the process. Do not argue with me about this, Mrs. Owens. My mind is made up." There was something about the way he said it, with absolute conviction and a hint of stubbornness that reminded her of her late husband, that made her realize arguing would be pointless. So she simply nodded and said, "You can stay if you want. Keep watch with me." Two pairs of eyes are better than one. Relief flickered across his face. "I would appreciate that. Thank you." And so they settled into an uneasy vigil, two strangers bound together by their care for a third. Zachary pulled a chair to the opposite side of the bed, and for a while they sat in silence, the only sounds the rasp of Caroline's breathing and the occasional creak of the old house settling in the heat. Natalie found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. He had the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors, but there was something else too. An intelligence in his eyes, a thoughtfulness in his expressions. He was not just another rough cowboy drifting through town. There was substance to him. "Where is home?" she asked eventually, needing to break the silence. "Colorado," Zachary said. "Near Denver. My father has a ranch there, cattle mostly, some horses. Caroline was supposed to marry a rancher's son. It was all arranged, but she wanted more than that. She wanted adventure, independence, so she ran." "Can you blame her?" Natalie asked. "Being sold off like property to some man she probably barely knew." Zachary's lips quirked in what might have been a smile under different circumstances. "I never said I blamed her. I understand why she ran. Our father can be stubborn and controlling. He thinks he knows what is best for everyone. But running off alone into territory she does not know, with barely any money or supplies, that was foolish. Brave, maybe, but foolish." "Sometimes bravery and foolishness look the same," Natalie said softly, thinking of her own impulsive decision to sell her ring. "Sometimes they are the same," Zachary agreed. He glanced at her again, and this time his gaze lingered. "How long have you been a widow?" 8 months, Natalie said. The number felt both impossibly small and infinitely large. "My husband was a horse trader. He had a good hand with animals, could gentle the wildest bronco. But his own horse spooked during a storm and threw him. Broke his neck. He died before the doctor could even get to him." "I am sorry," Zachary said, and unlike most condolences she had received, his sounded genuine rather than perfunctory. "So am I," Natalie said. "But being sorry does not change anything. You wake up every day and you keep going because that is what you do. That is all you can do." They lapsed into silence again, but it felt more comfortable this time, less strained. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Natalie prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and she was surprised when Zachary insisted on helping her. They moved around her small kitchen with awkward politeness, passing plates and utensils, careful not to brush against each other in the confined space. But there was something almost companionable about it, and Natalie realized with a start that it was the first time since Thomas died that she had shared a meal with someone. "You have been alone all this time?" Zachary asked as they ate at her small table, positioned so they could still see Caroline. "Mostly," Natalie said. "The neighbors check on me sometimes, but everyone has their own struggles. This is not an easy place to live. The land is hard, the weather is unforgiving. People do not have time to worry about one widow woman." "That must be lonely," Zachary said. Natalie shrugged, not trusting herself to answer honestly. The loneliness had been crushing at times, a weight that pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. But admitting that felt like admitting defeat, like saying she could not survive on her own. And she had to survive. There was no other option. The night deepened around them, and they took turns dozing in their chairs, each waking periodically to check on Caroline. Her fever remained high, her breathing labored. Around midnight she began to thrash, crying out in her delirium. Zachary was at her side instantly, speaking to her in low, soothing tones, trying to calm her without waking her fully. Natalie brought fresh water and clean cloths, and together they worked to make her comfortable. "She called me a monster once," Zachary said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion, "when I told her she had to honor Father's arrangement. She said I was just like him, that I did not care about what she wanted, that I only cared about family obligation and tradition." "Did she mean it?" Natalie asked. "I think so in that moment," Zachary said, "and maybe she was right. I was so focused on doing what I thought was right, on keeping the family together, that I did not listen to what she actually wanted. I failed her as a brother." "You are here now," Natalie pointed out. "You tracked her across hundreds of miles. You did not give up on her. That counts for something." Zachary looked at her, and in the lamplight his eyes seemed darker, more vulnerable. "Does it count if she dies before I can tell her I am sorry?" "She will not die," Natalie said with more confidence than she felt. "The doctor will be back tomorrow with the medicine. She will pull through, you have to believe that." "Why do you care so much?" Zachary asked. "About a stranger, about my sister. You do not know us. You have your own grief to carry. Why take on ours as well?" Natalie was quiet for a long moment, trying to put into words something she barely understood herself. "Because," she said finally, "when Thomas died, I felt like I died with him, like there was no point to anything anymore. And then yesterday I saw your sister lying in that street, and something inside me woke up. I thought, here is someone who still has a chance. Here is someone I can actually help. Maybe I could not save my husband, but I could save her. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Zachary said softly. "It makes perfect sense." Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. Two people who had both lost something precious, both struggling to find meaning in the aftermath. Natalie looked away first, uncomfortable with the intensity of the connection she felt. The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. Caroline's condition did not improve, but mercifully, it did not worsen either. She seemed to be holding in some terrible liminal space between life and death, waiting for the medicine that might tip the balance. As dawn began to paint the sky outside in shades of pink and gold, Natalie found herself praying to a God she was not sure she still believed in. "Please," she thought, "let her live. Let this one thing turn out right." Dr. Benson finally arrived late the following afternoon, his horse lathered and exhausted from the hard ride from Santa Fe. He carried a leather bag filled with glass bottles and clean bandages, and his expression was grim but determined. Zachary and Natalie stood back as he worked, administering the medicine and carefully cleaning and redressing a wound on Caroline's leg that had become badly infected. The wound itself was not large, but in the heat and dust of travel, it had festered until the infection spread through her whole body. "She should have seen a doctor days ago," Benson muttered as he worked. "Another day and we would have lost her for certain." But he did not say they had lost her now, and Natalie clung to that hope like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. The medicine was a new formulation, something that had only recently become available from back east. It was expensive and hard to come by, which was why Benson had to travel to Santa Fe to get it. But it was also remarkably effective against the kind of infection that had taken hold in Caroline. Within hours of the first dose, Caroline's fever began to drop. Her breathing eased, becoming deeper and more regular. The terrible flush faded from her cheeks, leaving her pale but peaceful. Zachary sat beside her, holding her hand, his face a mask of relief and exhaustion. Natalie felt her own tension finally begin to unwind, the knot in her chest loosening for the first time in 2 days. "She will sleep for a while," Dr. Benson said as he packed up his bag, "but she should wake fully by tomorrow. Keep giving her the medicine every 4 hours, make sure she drinks plenty of water when she wakes, and keep that wound clean. She will need at least a week of rest before she is strong enough to travel." "Thank you," Zachary said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for saving her." Benson glanced at Natalie. "Thank Mrs. Owens. She is the one who paid for all this. I was just the delivery man." After the doctor left, Zachary turned to Natalie with an expression she could not quite read. "I owe you everything," he said. "I do not know how I will ever repay you properly." "You already promised to get my ring back," Natalie said, trying to keep her tone light. "That is repayment enough." "It is not," Zachary said, "but it is a start." Caroline woke the next morning just as the sun was rising over the Sandia Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding her features as she tried to understand where she was and what had happened. Zachary was there immediately, speaking softly to her, explaining everything. Natalie hung back, suddenly feeling like an intruder on this private family moment. But Caroline's eyes found her anyway, and there was such raw gratitude in them that Natalie felt tears prick her own eyes. "You saved my life," Caroline whispered, her voice weak but clear. "Your brother did," Natalie said. "He is the one who came looking for you." "You both did," Caroline said. "Zach told me what you sacrificed. I do not understand why you would do that for a stranger." Natalie moved closer to the bed, sitting on the edge of the chair she had occupied for the past few days. "Maybe I needed to save someone," she said honestly. "Maybe I needed to know that good things could still happen in this world." Caroline reached out a trembling hand, and Natalie took it, surprised by the strength in the young woman's grip. "Thank you," Caroline said. "I will never forget this. Never." Over the following week, Caroline's strength returned steadily. She was a spirited young woman, full of opinions and dreams that had seemed impossible in the confines of her father's ranch. She talked about wanting to see the ocean, to visit cities back east, to maybe even become a teacher. Natalie found herself drawn to Caroline's enthusiasm, remembering what it felt like to dream of a future beyond the next difficult day. Zachary, meanwhile, proved to be surprisingly helpful around Natalie's small homestead. He repaired the sagging door on her shed, fixed a leak in her roof that she had been ignoring for months, and even helped her tend to her small vegetable garden. He worked with quiet competence, never making a fuss, never expecting praise. It was simply what needed to be done, so he did it. They fell into an easy rhythm, the three of them. Mornings were for tending to Caroline and managing the household chores. Afternoons, when the heat was most intense, they would sit in the shade and talk. Caroline told stories about growing up in Colorado, about the mountains and the wildlife and the harsh winters. Zachary shared tales from his years working his father's ranch, learning to manage cattle and break horses and survive in wild country. Natalie contributed her own memories of life in Placitas, of the characters who passed through, and the slow, steady pulse of survival in the desert. But it was the evenings that Natalie came to treasure most. After Caroline went to sleep, she and Zachary would sit outside, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was 12, leaving him to help raise Caroline. She told him about meeting Thomas, about their courtship and brief marriage, about the dreams they had shared for a future that would never come. "You think you will ever marry again?" Zachary asked one night, his voice careful. Natalie considered the question. A few weeks ago, the answer would have been an immediate and emphatic no. The thought of loving someone else, of opening herself up to that kind of loss again, had seemed impossible. But something was shifting inside her, some long, frozen part of her heart beginning to thaw. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I never thought I would, but lately I have been wondering if maybe loneliness is a worse fate than the risk of loss." Zachary was quiet for a moment. "I have never been married," he said, "never even come close. I always thought there was too much work to do, too many responsibilities. But watching Caroline almost die, seeing how fragile life is, it makes you think about what matters, about what you might be missing while you are so focused on obligation." Their eyes met in the starlight, and Natalie felt something flutter in her chest. It was too soon, surely. Thomas had only been gone 8 months. She should still be in mourning, still wearing her grief like a badge of honor, but her heart did not seem to care about should or ought. It simply beat faster when Zachary smiled at her, warmed when he said her name. "I think I am falling in love with you," Zachary said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I know it is too fast. I know you are still grieving your husband. I know I have no right. But I cannot help it. These past days with you have been the happiest I have had in years. You are strong and kind and beautiful, and I cannot imagine leaving here without you." Natalie stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Zachary," she whispered, not sure what she meant to say. "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. I could not leave without telling you. You are leaving." The words came out sharper than she intended, laced with a panic she had not known she felt. "Caroline will be strong enough to travel soon," Zachary said. "I need to take her home, face my father, figure out what comes next for both of us. But I want you to come with us. Or let me come back for you. I do not care which. I just know I do not want this to end here." Natalie stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of sage and dust. She walked a few steps away, staring out at the dark shapes of the mountains against the starlit sky. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to leap at this chance for happiness. But another part, the part still raw with grief, held her back. "Thomas was my whole world," she said quietly. "When he died, I thought my life was over. I thought I would just exist in this house, waiting to join him. And then I found Caroline, and suddenly I had a purpose again. And then you came, and suddenly I felt alive again. But I do not know if that is love or just desperation. I do not know if I am ready." Zachary came to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching. "I am not asking you to forget your husband," he said. "I am not asking you to stop grieving. I am just asking you to consider that maybe there is room in your heart for both, room to honor what you had and room to build something new." Natalie turned to face him, and in the moonlight his face was open and honest and hopeful. "What if I am not strong enough?" she asked. "What if I fail you? What if I cannot be what you need?" "You are the strongest person I have ever met," Zachary said. "You sold your most precious possession to save a stranger. You sat vigil for days over someone you did not know. You have survived loss that would have broken most people. You are more than strong enough." "I am scared," Natalie admitted. "So am I," Zachary said. "But maybe that means it matters. Maybe being scared means it is real." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her face gently in his hands. His touch was warm and careful, as if she were something precious that might shatter. "I love you, Natalie Owens," he said. "And if you need time, I will wait. If you need space, I will give it to you. But please do not ask me to pretend this does not exist between us." Please do not ask me to walk away and forget." Natalie felt tears slide down her cheeks, but for the first time in 8 months, they were not entirely tears of sorrow. There was something else mixed in. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could. I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone again, but I do." Zachary's smile was like sunrise, bright and transformative. He leaned in slowly, and when his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Natalie kissed him back, letting herself feel the connection, the spark of something new and precious. It did not erase her love for Thomas. Nothing could do that. But it existed alongside it, proof that her heart was larger than she had believed, capable of holding both grief and joy, both memory and hope. When they finally pulled apart, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Come with us," he said again. "Come to Colorado. Let me show you the mountains. Let me build you a life where you can be happy again." "What about your father?" Natalie asked. "What about Caroline's marriage arrangement? My father will have to accept that his children are grown and capable of making their own choices," Zachary said firmly. "And Caroline will not be forced into any marriage she does not want. I will make sure of that. As for you and me, well, we will figure that out together, if you are willing." Natalie thought about her small adobe house, about the life she had built with Thomas and then tried to maintain alone after his death. It had felt like a prison lately, a place where she was trapped with her grief and her memories. But maybe it was not a prison. Maybe it was just a chapter that was ending, making room for a new one to begin. "Yes," she said, "I will come with you." The joy on Zachary's face was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around like she weighed nothing, and when he set her down, they were both laughing. Inside the house, Caroline called out asking what all the commotion was about, and they went in together to tell her the news. Caroline's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "I knew it," she crowed, sitting up in bed despite her lingering weakness. "I told Zach 3 days ago that he was in love with you. He tried to deny it, but I could tell." "You should have been resting instead of playing matchmaker," Zachary said, but his tone was fond. "Rest is boring," Caroline said. "This is much more interesting. Besides, you two are perfect for each other. Anyone can see that." "We barely know each other," Natalie protested, though she was smiling. "So," Caroline said, "you will have a lifetime to figure it out. That is the whole point." 2 days later, Zachary left for town, riding Natalie's old mare since his own horse needed rest. He had a specific mission, and Natalie tried not to think too hard about what it meant. Instead, she focused on helping Caroline continue her recovery and on beginning to sort through her possessions, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. It was harder than she expected. Every object held memories. The quilt Thomas's mother had made them as a wedding gift, the coffee pot they had used every morning, the books Thomas had read aloud to her on winter evenings. "You do not have to leave everything behind," Caroline said gently, watching Natalie stare at a photograph of her and Thomas on their wedding day. "You can bring the things that matter. The memories do not live in the objects anyway. They live in here." She tapped her chest over her heart. "I know," Natalie said, "but it still feels like I am betraying him somehow, moving on so quickly." 8 months is not quick," Caroline said. "And love is not betrayal. Thomas would want you to be happy, would he not? Would he want you to spend the rest of your life alone and grieving?" "No," Natalie admitted. "He would hate that. He always said life was too short to waste on regrets and what-ifs." "Then honor him by living," Caroline said simply. "Love my brother, build a new life, and know that you are not erasing what came before. You are just adding to it." Zachary returned at sunset, and Natalie knew the moment she saw his face that he had been successful. He dismounted quickly and strode toward her with something clutched in his hand. When he opened his palm, she saw her wedding ring, the gold gleaming in the fading light. "Silas drove a hard bargain," Zachary said, "but I got it back." Natalie stared at the ring, feeling a complex tangle of emotions, relief that it had been recovered, sadness for what it represented, and something else, something that took her a moment to identify. Closure, perhaps. A sense that this chapter was truly ending, and she could move forward without regret. "Thank you," she said, taking the ring. It felt heavier than she remembered, weighted with memory and meaning. She slipped it onto her right hand, deliberately choosing not to put it back on her left ring finger. That finger was for the present and the future, not the past. Zachary seemed to understand the significance of her choice. He pulled something else from his pocket, a small velvet pouch. "I got something else in town, too," he said. "I know this is fast. I know we should probably wait and do this properly, but I also know what I want. What I have wanted since the moment I met you." He opened the pouch and withdrew a ring, simpler than her wedding band but no less beautiful. It was silver, with a small turquoise stone set in the center. "This stone is from Colorado," he said, "from land near my family's ranch. I had the jeweler in Santa Fe make it for me years ago, thinking I would give it to someone special someday. I just never met the right person until now." He knelt in the dust, right there in front of her house, and looked up at her with such naked hope and love that Natalie felt her breath catch. "Natalie Owens, I know we have only known each other a short time. I know you are still healing from loss. I know this should probably scare me more than it does. But I also know that you are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. Will you marry me?" Natalie looked down at him, this man who had come into her life by chance and changed everything. She thought about the wedding band on her right hand, about the love it represented and the life she had lost. Then she thought about the ring Zachary was offering, about the possibilities it held and the future it promised. Both were precious. Both were real. And she was large enough, strong enough to hold both in her heart. "Yes," she said, and her voice was clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." Zachary stood and slipped the ring onto her left hand, and Natalie was struck by how right it felt there. The weight was different from her wedding band, the metal cool against her skin, but it belonged. He belonged. When he kissed her, gentle and reverent, she kissed him back with all the love and hope she had thought was lost forever. Caroline cheered from the doorway where she had been shamelessly watching the entire proposal. "Finally," she called. "I was starting to think Zach would lose his nerve." "I do not lose my nerve," Zachary said, not taking his eyes off Natalie. "You do sometimes," Caroline teased, "but not today. Today you were very brave." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in the small church in Placitas. Dr. Benson served as one witness, and Caroline, now fully recovered and glowing with health, served as the other. Natalie wore a simple blue dress that had been her mother's, and Zachary wore his best shirt and the same hat he had been wearing the day they met. The priest spoke about love and commitment and faith, and Natalie listened with her hand in Zachary's, feeling the cool press of his ring on her finger. When it came time for Zachary to place the ring on her finger, Natalie was confused since she was already wearing it. But then she realized he was reaching for her right hand, for the finger that bore Thomas's ring. Gently, carefully, he slid the gold band off and then placed it back on, his eyes meeting hers. "I am not replacing what came before," he said softly, speaking directly to her even though the priest and witnesses were watching. "I am honoring it. You loved before me, and that love made you who you are. I am grateful for it, grateful for him. And I promise to cherish both the woman you were and the woman you are becoming." Natalie felt tears slide down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. No one had told Zachary to do this. He had thought of it himself, understood without being told how much she needed this acknowledgement, that choosing him did not mean abandoning Thomas, that her heart was big enough for both. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he said. And then he kissed her while Caroline whooped and the priest cleared his throat in mild disapproval, and Dr. Benson smiled his tired, knowing smile. Afterward, there was a small celebration at the hotel in town. Nothing elaborate, just cake and coffee and a few townspeople who had known Natalie since she arrived in Placitas. Silas the pawnbroker was there, and he pulled Natalie aside at one point. "I am glad your story has a happy ending," he said gruffly. "When you sold that ring, I thought you were making a terrible mistake. But maybe sometimes we have to lose things to find what really matters." "Maybe," Natalie agreed, glancing over at Zachary, who was talking with Caroline and laughing at something she had said. "Or maybe we have to be willing to sacrifice what matters to discover we are capable of love in ways we never imagined." Silas nodded, his old face creasing in thought. "That is a better way to put it. You are a wise woman, Mrs. Vance." The name was still strange to her ears, but also thrilling. Mrs. Vance. She had been Mrs. Owens for such a short time, and she had thought that name would define her forever. But here she was, becoming someone new while still honoring who she had been. It felt like a kind of miracle. They left Placitas 2 days later, beginning the long journey north to Colorado. Natalie had sold her house and most of her possessions, keeping only what was most precious: the photograph of her and Thomas, some of his books, a few pieces of her mother's jewelry. Everything else was left behind, given away to neighbors or sold to fund their travels. It should have felt like loss, like tearing away pieces of herself. But instead, it felt like freedom, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. The journey took nearly 3 weeks, traveling by horse and wagon through the high desert and then up into the mountains. Natalie had never seen landscape like this. The towering peaks dusted with snow even in summer. The vast forests of pine and aspen. The crystal-clear streams that cut through valleys so green and lush they seemed like something from a dream. It was beautiful and strange and completely different from the harsh desert she had called home for the past few years. Zachary's ranch was nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains, with a sturdy main house built from timber and stone. There were several outbuildings, extensive corrals, and hundreds of acres of grazing land. It was clearly prosperous, well-maintained, and much larger than Natalie had imagined. But it was also, she could tell immediately, a place that needed a woman's touch. The house was clean but sparse, functional but not welcoming. It was a place where men lived and worked, not a home. Zachary's father, Zachary Vance, was waiting on the porch when they arrived. He was an older version of his son, with the same broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin, but his eyes were harder, more suspicious. He looked from Zachary to Caroline to Natalie, his expression unreadable. "You found her," he said, his voice gruff. "I had almost given up hope." "She is safe," Zachary said, helping Caroline down from the wagon. "But things are going to be different now, Father. Caroline will not be marrying Daniel Morrison. That arrangement is over." Zane's jaw tightened. "We will discuss this privately." "No," Zachary said firmly. "There is nothing to discuss. Caroline gets to choose her own future, and I have chosen mine." He moved to stand beside Natalie, taking her hand. "This is my wife, Natalie. We were married in Placitas. She saved Caroline's life, and she has agreed to build a life here with me. I hope you will welcome her as family." Zane studied Natalie with sharp eyes, and she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. She had survived loss and grief and starting over once already. She could survive a difficult father-in-law if she had to. After a long moment, something in Zane's expression softened slightly. "You saved my daughter's life," he asked. "I helped," Natalie said. "Your son is the one who tracked her down and made sure she got proper treatment. I just offered shelter and paid for medicine." "She sold her wedding ring from her first marriage to pay for that medicine," Caroline interjected. "She gave up something precious to save me when I was just a stranger." Zane's eyes widened slightly, and he looked at Natalie with new respect. "That is a rare kind of selflessness," he said. "Rare and valuable. You are welcome here, daughter, and I apologize that our first meeting is so complicated." The tension eased, and Natalie felt Zachary relax beside her. They all moved into the house, and over dinner that evening, the full story came out. Caroline spoke passionately about her dreams, about wanting to see more of the world before settling down. Zachary explained his decision to marry Natalie, his voice firm and unwavering. And Natalie shared her own story, the grief and loss that had brought her to the point where saving a stranger had felt like saving herself. Zane listened to all of it, his weathered face thoughtful. When everyone had spoken, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have been a stubborn old fool. I thought I knew what was best for my children, but I was just trying to control what I was afraid of losing. I lost my wife 15 years ago, and I have been terrified of losing anything else since then. But fear is no way to live, and it is no way to love." He looked at Caroline. "If you want to see the world, then see it. I will not stand in your way. Just promise me you will come back eventually, even if only to visit." Caroline's eyes filled with tears, and she moved to embrace her father. "I promise," she said. "Thank you for understanding." Then Zane turned to Zachary and Natalie. "As for you two, I can see you love each other. It is plain as day. Build your life here if you want it. This ranch will be yours someday anyway, Zachary. You have earned it 100 times over. And Natalie, you are family now. That means this is your home too. Make of it what you will." It was more than Natalie had dared hope for. She thanked Zane, her voice thick with emotion, and he waved away her gratitude gruffly. But she could see the approval in his eyes, the acknowledgement that she belonged. The first year of their marriage was busy and challenging and joyful in equal measure. Natalie threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, adding curtains and rugs and small touches that made the space feel warmer and more welcoming. She planted a garden, using techniques she had learned in the dry soil of New Mexico, but adapting them for the richer, wetter earth of Colorado. She learned to manage the household accounts, to plan meals for the ranch hands, to navigate the complex social dynamics of the small ranching community. But more than any of that, she learned what it meant to be loved by Zachary Vance. He was patient and kind, passionate and thoughtful. He never pushed her to forget Thomas, never seemed threatened by the memories she still carried. Instead, he made space for her grief while also filling her life with new joy. They would sit together in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, and talk about everything. Their pasts, their dreams, the daily minutiae of running a ranch. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, content just to be near each other. Their physical relationship unfolded slowly, carefully, with Zachary always attentive to what Natalie needed. The first time they made love, she cried afterward, overwhelmed by the conflicting emotions of feeling both guilty and grateful, both mourning and celebrating. Zachary held her through it, whispering that it was all right, that she was allowed to feel everything she felt. "I love you," he said against her hair. "All of you. The grief and the joy, the past and the present. You do not have to choose between them. You do not have to leave any part of yourself behind." And she believed him because he proved it every day in 1,000 small ways. The way he always made her coffee in the morning. The way he listened when she needed to talk about Thomas. The way he held her hand when they walked into town, proud to have her by his side. The way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. Caroline stayed through the winter, but when spring came, she announced her intention to travel. She wanted to see San Francisco, maybe even sail to Hawaii. Zachary was worried, but he kept his promise and did not try to stop her. Instead, he gave her money and letters of introduction to business contacts he had in various cities, and he made her promise to write regularly. "You will take care of each other." Caroline asked Natalie the night before she left, the two of them sitting in the room that had become Caroline's during her stay. "We will," Natalie promised, "and you will take care of yourself. Be smart and safe." "I will," Caroline said. "You know, I used to resent you a little bit. When I first woke up and learned that some widow woman had saved my life, I felt like I owed you something I could never repay. But now, I see it differently. You did not save me to create a debt. You saved me because you are a good person who needed to do something good. And in doing that, you saved yourself too. You gave yourself permission to live again." "Maybe," Natalie said softly. "Or maybe you and your brother both saved me in different ways." Caroline smiled. "Then we are even. No debts, just gratitude and love." They embraced, and when Caroline left the next morning, Natalie stood beside Zachary and watched until her figure disappeared down the mountain road. It felt like an ending, but also a beginning. The three of them had been bound together by crisis, but the bonds that remained were stronger than circumstance. They were family now, and that meant something permanent. Life settled into a rhythm after Caroline left. The ranch demanded constant attention, especially as spring turned to summer and then fall. There were cattle to manage, fences to mend, supplies to order for the coming winter. Natalie learned to ride better, to help with some of the lighter ranch work when extra hands were needed. She formed friendships with the other ranch wives in the area, women who understood the challenges of living in this beautiful but unforgiving landscape. And through it all, her love for Zachary deepened and matured. The initial passionate spark mellowed into something warmer and more enduring, a love built on partnership and respect as much as desire. They learned each other's rhythms, their habits and quirks and fears. They had their first argument about 6 months into their marriage, something silly about how to organize the barn, and Natalie was terrified that it meant they were falling apart. But Zachary had laughed and pulled her into his arms and said that fighting was normal, that it meant they were both invested enough to care. "I am not going anywhere," he said, "even when you are being stubborn and wrong." "I am not wrong," she had protested, but she was smiling. "Yes, you are," he said, kissing her, "but I love you anyway." Winter came early that year, snow falling in October and piling up until the world was white and silent and impossibly beautiful. Natalie, who had spent most of her life in warmer climates, was awed by the stark majesty of it. But she also learned quickly how harsh winter in the mountains could be. The cold was bitter and unrelenting, the work of keeping livestock alive exhausting. There were days when the snow fell so heavily they could barely see from the house to the barn, days when venturing outside without proper gear meant risking frostbite or worse. But there was also something magical about it. The way the snow transformed familiar landscape into something alien and pristine. The quiet that settled over everything, broken only by the occasional cry of an eagle or the soft whisper of falling snow. The long evenings spent by the fire, wrapped in blankets, reading aloud to each other or simply talking. It was during one of those long winter evenings that Natalie realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling off for a few weeks, tired and nauseous, but she had attributed it to the rich winter food and the exhaustion of the season. But when she counted back and realized she had missed her monthly courses twice now, the truth became undeniable. She told Zachary that night after they had gone to bed. She was nervous, unsure how he would react. They had never discussed children, never planned for them. It was one of those things that lived in some vague future, something to think about later. But later had apparently arrived. "I think I am pregnant," she said into the darkness. Zachary went very still beside her. Then he rolled over to face her, and even in the dim moonlight filtering through the window, she could see the wonder on his face. "Are you certain?" "Fairly certain," she said. "I have been sick in the mornings, and I have missed my courses twice. Unless I am very wrong, there will be a baby by late summer." Zachary's hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Natalie asked, needing to hear it. "I am terrified," Zachary admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I am so happy I could burst. We are going to have a child, Natalie, a little person who is part you and part me. How could I be anything but happy?" Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. She had not let herself think too deeply about what this meant, about the fact that she was creating new life with a man who was not Thomas. But hearing the joy in Zachary's voice, feeling his hand warm against her belly, she realized that this was not a betrayal. This was growth. This was life continuing, evolving, becoming something new and beautiful. "I wish Thomas could have seen me become a mother," she said softly. "We wanted children. We talked about it all the time, but we were going to wait, save more money, be more established. And then he died, and I thought that dream died with him." "He would be happy for you," Zachary said with certainty. "He would be glad you found love again, glad you get to be a mother. You get to have this, Natalie. You get to have all of it, the grief and the joy, the loss and the gain. You are allowed." "I know," she said. "I am starting to truly believe that, finally." The pregnancy progressed through the winter and into spring. As the snow melted and the first flowers began to push through the earth, Natalie's belly grew round and full. She felt the baby move for the first time in April, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her gasp in wonder. Zachary was there, his hand on her stomach, and they both fell silent in awe when they felt the tiny kick. "Hello, little one," Zachary whispered. "We cannot wait to meet you." Caroline returned in May, just in time to see Natalie heavily pregnant and glowing with health. She squealed with delight at the news and immediately appointed herself the baby's favorite aunt. She entertained them with stories of her travels, of the strange and wonderful things she had seen. She had been to San Francisco and fallen in love with the ocean, had met artists and writers and dreamers. She was considering settling there permanently, maybe opening a shop or teaching school. "But I will come back for the birth," she promised. "I want to meet my niece or nephew." "It might be a nephew," Zachary said. "We do not know yet." "It is a boy," Caroline said with confidence. "I can tell." As it turned out, Caroline was right. Natalie went into labor on a hot August evening, and after 12 hours of exhausting work, she delivered a healthy baby boy. He had dark hair like his father and eyes that were an indeterminate color, but would probably turn out to be some mix of Natalie's brown and Zachary's gray-green. He was perfect, from his tiny fingers to his loud, lusty cry. Zachary wept when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face unchecked. "He is so small," he said in wonder. "So perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, holding her son, feeling the weight of him in her arms and the overwhelming rush of love that accompanied new motherhood, Natalie knew what felt right. "Thomas," she said softly. "His middle name should be Thomas, to honor the man who loved me first, who helped make me who I am." Zachary looked at her with such love and understanding that she thought her heart might burst. "That is perfect," he said. "What about his first name?" "Zachariah," Natalie said. "After his father, but we will call him Zeke so we do not get confused." And so Zachariah Thomas Vance entered the world, known as Zeke, loved beyond measure from his first breath. He was a good baby, healthy and strong with his father's determination and his mother's resilience. Caring for him was exhausting but joyful, and Natalie discovered that she loved being a mother even more than she had imagined. Zachary was a devoted father, never too tired or too busy to help with the baby. He would walk Zeke around the house late at night when he was fussy, singing soft, off-key lullabies. He changed diapers without complaint and marveled over every tiny development. First smile, first laugh, first time rolling over. Each milestone was a wonder to be celebrated. Caroline stayed through the fall, helping with the baby and the household. But when winter approached, she announced it was time to return to San Francisco. She had been offered a job teaching at a school for girls, something that excited her tremendously. They said their goodbyes with tears and promises to visit, and then she was gone again, leaving Natalie and Zachary alone with their son. The second winter was easier than the first, perhaps because Natalie knew what to expect, or perhaps because the presence of the baby made even the darkest days feel bright. Zeke grew and changed, becoming more of a person every day. By his first birthday, he was walking and babbling and getting into everything, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. Zane doted on his grandson, softening in ways no one had expected. The stern, rigid man who had tried to control his children's futures became a gentle grandfather who let Zeke pull his beard and climb all over him. It was a transformation that brought tears to Zachary's eyes more than once. "I never thought I would see him like this," he told Natalie one evening, watching his father carefully stack blocks with Zeke, only to laugh when the toddler knocked them down. Happy, free. He was so locked in his grief for so long. "Maybe we all were," Natalie said. "Maybe it just takes time and love and the right reasons to let ourselves heal." As Zeke grew from toddler to boy, Natalie and Zachary's love continued to deepen. They were partners in every sense of the word, running the ranch together, raising their son together, building a life that was richer and more fulfilling than either had imagined possible. There were hard times, of course. Years when the cattle prices dropped, when drought threatened their livelihood, when illness swept through the valley. But they weathered everything together, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. They had 2 more children in the years that followed. A daughter named Nora, who had Natalie's brown eyes and a fierce independence that reminded everyone of Caroline. And then another son, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful and loved books more than horses. The house that had once been sparse and empty became filled with noise and laughter and love. It became the home Natalie had dreamed of, but thought she would never have. Caroline visited regularly, becoming a beloved fixture in her nieces' and nephews' lives. She never married, content with her independence and her work, but she loved fiercely and lived fully. Zane passed away peacefully in his sleep when Zeke was 10, having lived long enough to see all 3 of his grandchildren grow into bright, remarkable individuals. His death was sad but not tragic. He had found peace in his final years, and that was enough. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful, Natalie would take out the photograph of her and Thomas. She would look at their young, hopeful faces and feel a bittersweet ache. She still missed him, would always miss him, but the grief no longer consumed her. Instead, it was simply part of the tapestry of her life, a thread woven among many others. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked one such evening, coming to stand behind her and look at the photograph over her shoulder. "Marrying me, leaving your old life behind." "Never," Natalie said firmly, turning to face him. She wore 2 rings on her right hand now, her original wedding band from Thomas and a plain gold band Zachary had given her on their 10th anniversary. On her left hand, the turquoise ring he had proposed with gleamed softly. "I love Thomas and I always will, but I love you too. My heart is big enough for both, it always was. I just had to learn to believe it." Zachary kissed her, slow and sweet, a kiss that held years of shared history and decades of future yet to come. "I love you, Natalie Vance," he said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who did not know what he was looking for until he found you." "Thank you for finding my ring," Natalie said. "Thank you for placing it back on my finger and understanding what it meant. Thank you for loving all of me, even the broken parts." "You were never broken," Zachary said. "You were healing. There is a difference." They stood together in the fading light, 2 people who had found each other in the most unexpected way, bound together by sacrifice and fate and a love that had grown from the most unlikely beginnings. Outside, the Colorado mountains stood eternal and unchanging. Inside, their children slept safely. And in between, Natalie and Zachary held each other, grateful for every moment that had led them here. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Zeke grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He took over more and more of the daily operations, allowing Zachary to slow down as age began to catch up with him. Nora became a teacher, following in her Aunt Caroline's footsteps, and she split her time between the ranch and the growing town nearby. Samuel studied to become a lawyer, the first in the family to pursue such a profession, and they were all immensely proud. The ranch prospered under their careful stewardship, becoming one of the most respected operations in the territory. But more than the financial success, it was the feeling of the place that mattered most. The ranch had become a gathering place, a home where family and friends were always welcome, where love was abundant and freely given. It was exactly what Natalie had once dreamed of in those dark days after Thomas died, when she thought she would never be happy again. On Natalie and Zachary's 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, filling the house and spilling out into the yard. Caroline traveled from San Francisco, older but still vibrant, still full of stories and laughter. There was music and dancing and a feast that lasted well into the night. At one point, Zachary pulled Natalie onto the makeshift dance floor, and they swayed together under the stars while their family and friends looked on. He held her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I cannot believe it has been 25 years, Zachary murmured. "It feels like yesterday that I walked up to your door, looking for my sister and found you instead." "The best accident of your life," Natalie teased. "The best gift," Zachary corrected. "Not an accident, fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it. We were meant to find each other, Natalie. I have never doubted that, not for a single day." "Neither have I," Natalie said. She thought of that young widow who had sold her wedding ring to save a stranger, who had taken a leap of faith that had changed everything. That woman had been scared and grieving and uncertain. This woman, the woman she had become, was still all of those things sometimes. But she was also loved and loving, content and grateful, whole in ways she had once thought impossible. "Thank you," she whispered to Thomas wherever he was. "Thank you for loving me first, for teaching me what love could be. I hope you know I have been happy. I hope you know I have lived fully, just like you wanted." Then she looked up at Zachary, at the man who had placed her wedding ring back on her finger all those years ago, who had honored her past while building her future, and she said, "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for every single day." "Always," Zachary said, and he kissed her while their family applauded and the stars wheeled overhead in the vast Colorado sky. They danced until Natalie's feet ached and Zachary's back protested, and then they sat on the porch steps, watching their children and grandchildren celebrate. Yes, grandchildren. Zeke had married a neighboring rancher's daughter and already had 2 little ones of his own, and watching them play reminded Natalie of when her own children had been small. "We did all right, did we not?" Zachary asked, his arm around her shoulders. "We did better than all right," Natalie said. "We did wonderfully." As the years moved forward, they grew older together with grace and gratitude. There were aches and pains, gray hairs and wrinkles, the inevitable slowdowns that came with age. But there was also wisdom and peace and a love that had been tested by time and found unbreakable. When Natalie was in her 60s, she wrote down her story, not for publication or for strangers, but for her children and grandchildren, so they would know how she and Zachary had found each other. She wrote about Thomas and her first love, about grief and loss. She wrote about the day she found Caroline and the decision to sell her wedding ring. She wrote about Zachary showing up at her door and falling in love, despite all the reasons she thought she could not. She wrote about building a life from the ashes of her old one, about learning that love was not a finite resource, but something that could grow and expand to encompass more than she had ever imagined. When she finished, she gave the manuscript to Zachary to read. He sat with it for an entire evening, reading by lamplight while she knitted and pretended not to watch him. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "You remember it exactly right," he said. "Every moment, every feeling. This is us, Natalie. This is our story." "I wanted them to know," Natalie said. "I wanted them to understand that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best ones. That being willing to sacrifice what we love can open us up to loving even more deeply. That it is all right to honor the past while embracing the future." "They will treasure this," Zachary said, "just like I treasure you." He crossed the room and kissed her, and even after all these years her heart still fluttered at his touch. That more than anything told her they had gotten it right. The passion had mellowed into something deeper and richer, but it had never disappeared. They still chose each other, every single day. As Natalie entered her 70s, she remained healthy and active, still helping around the ranch and spending time with her growing brood of grandchildren. She taught the girls to garden and the boys to cook, ignoring the raised eyebrows from some of the more traditional neighbors. She told them stories about the old days, about growing up and falling in love and learning to survive loss. She wanted them to understand that life was complicated and beautiful and worth living fully, no matter what challenges arose. Zachary stayed strong too, though he eventually passed the ranch operations entirely to Zeke, content to act as an advisor rather than the boss. He spent his days working with horses, gentling the difficult ones with the same patient kindness he had shown Natalie all those years ago. He took long rides with Natalie when the weather was good, showing her places in the mountains they had never explored together. After decades of marriage, they were still finding new ways to be together, still discovering new facets of each other. One summer evening, as the sun set over the mountains in a blaze of gold and crimson, Natalie and Zachary sat on their porch as they had countless times before. Their children and grandchildren were gathered for a family dinner, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting out from inside the house. But for this moment, it was just the two of them, watching the day end and the stars begin to emerge. "If you could go back," Zachary asked. To that day when you sold your ring, would you do anything differently? Natalie considered the question carefully. She thought about the young widow she had been, desperate and grieving and trying to find meaning in a world that seemed to have lost all purpose. She thought about the choice she had made, the sacrifice that had seemed so enormous at the time, and she thought about everything that had come after. The love, the family, the life she had built with this man beside her. No, she said finally. I would not change a thing. Every choice I made, every sacrifice, every moment of pain and joy led me here, led me to you, to our children, to this life. How could I regret any of it? Even losing Thomas? Zachary asked gently. Even that, Natalie said, though her voice caught slightly. I wish he had lived, of course. I wish he had gotten the long, happy life he deserved, but his death made me who I am. It taught me about strength and resilience. It opened me up to loving you in a way I might not have if I had not known loss. I carry him with me always, but he does not hold me back. He never did. Zachary took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the rings she wore. Both the turquoise ring from him and the gold band from Thomas, side by side on her left hand now. Years ago, she had moved Thomas's ring from her right hand to her left, placing it next to Zachary's ring. It had felt right to have both together, a physical representation of her heart that held both loves equally. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Zachary said. And I thank God every day that I walked up to your door looking for my sister. Best decision of my life was to love you. Best decision of my life was to let you, Natalie said. Inside, someone called that dinner was ready, and they could hear the shuffle of chairs and the clatter of dishes. Their family, gathered together, safe and happy and whole. It was more than either of them had dared dream of in those early, uncertain days. They stood together, moving a bit more slowly than they once had, but still steady, still strong. Hand in hand, they walked back into the house, into the warmth and light and love that filled every corner. Their story had started with sacrifice and loss, with a wedding ring sold for a stranger's cure, and a cowboy who had found it and placed it back where it belonged. But it had grown into something far larger and more beautiful than either could have imagined. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its infinite capacity to heal and grow and love again. And as Natalie looked around the table at her family, at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, she knew that every moment of pain had been worth it. Every sacrifice had led to this abundance. Every ending had been the beginning of something better. She caught Zachary's eye across the table, and he smiled at her with a warmth that had not dimmed in nearly 3 decades of marriage. And Natalie smiled back, her heart full to overflowing with gratitude and joy and a love that had proven itself stronger than grief, stronger than fear, stronger than anything the world could throw at them. This was their happily ever after, hard-won and deeply cherished. And it was more than enough. It was everything,